In the world of criminology, there is a concept known as the locked room mystery. It is usually a trope reserved for fiction Agatha Christie novels or Sherlock Holmes stories. But on April 1st, 2006, the trope became reality. This is Brian Shaffer. He is 27 years old. He is a medical student. And right now, you are looking at the very last recorded moments of his life. The time is 1:55 a.m. Brian is standing at the entrance of the Ugly Tuna Saloona in Columbus, Ohio. He says goodbye to these two women. He turns. He walks back inside the bar. Here is the problem. The bar is on the second floor. There is only one public entrance, the escalator. It is covered by a security camera. That camera recorded every single person leaving the bar when the lights came on at 2 a.m. It recorded the staff. It recorded the patrons. It recorded the police sweeps. But it never recorded Brian Shaffer coming out. He did not go out the fire escape. The alarms never triggered. He did not go out the construction exit. It was a sheer drop into a secured site. He walked into a room, and physics simply stopped working. To understand how someone disappears, we first have to understand who they were when they were visible. And by all accounts, Brian Shaffer was the kind of guy who had everything to live for. In the spring of 2006, Brian was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University. He was handsome, charming, and intelligent. He had a long-term girlfriend, Alexis, whom he was planning to propose to. On paper, his life was perfect. But if you looked closer, you would see the cracks. Because just 3 weeks before he walked into that bar, Brian's world had shattered. Brian was incredibly close with his mother, Renee. She was his anchor. But in early March of 2006, Renee passed away after a brutal battle with a rare form of bone cancer. Her death devastated him. Friends said that while Brian went through the motions, studying, smiling, socializing, there was a heaviness to him. He was exhausted. He told friends he was struggling to handle the pressure of medical school while processing this massive grief. So, when Friday, March 31st rolled around, it wasn't just a Friday night. It was the start of spring break. It was a chance to escape the books, escape the grief, and just be a 27-year-old guy for a night. The night began innocently enough. Brian went to dinner with his father, Randy. They had steaks. Randy later noted that Brian seemed tired, but excited to go out with his friends. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Randy told Brian he loved him. Brian said, "I love you too, Dad. See you tomorrow." It was a promise he wouldn't be able to keep. Brian met up with his friend, William Clint Florence, at a spot called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. And this is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a mystery. Because the events that unfolded over the next 4 hours would baffle police for nearly 2 decades. After dinner with his father, Brian met up with his friend, Clint Florence, around 9 p.m. They started their night at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It's a strange name, but in 2006, it was the place to be. It was located in the South Campus Gateway Complex, a newly renovated, upscale part of the University District. Now, the layout of this building is the most critical piece of evidence in this entire case. Please, listen closely. The Ugly Tuna wasn't on the street level. It was on the second floor. To get into the bar, you had to walk into a main lobby on the ground floor and ride an escalator up. This escalator was the main artery. It was how you got in, and it was how you got out. And right at the top of that escalator, mounted on the wall, was a security camera. Brian and Clint had a few drinks there early in the evening, but they didn't stay long. They decided to go bar hopping down in the arena district. They grabbed shots, they drank beer, they celebrated the start of spring break. By all accounts, Brian was drinking heavily. He was blowing off steam. Around 1:15 a.m., the night was winding down. Most people would have gone home, but Brian and Clint decided to head back to where they started. They took a cab back to the South Campus Gateway to hit the Ugly Tuna one last time before last call. They were joined by a third friend, Meredith Reed. The three of them rode that escalator up to the second floor. The security camera captured them entering at 1:15 a.m. Brian is seen wearing a green polo shirt with a long-sleeved white shirt underneath. He looks steady, he looks normal. He walks into the bar and into the crowd. Whatever happened next happened in a window of less than 45 minutes. Inside the bar, the atmosphere was loud. The band was finishing their set. It was that chaotic, end-of-the-night energy where the lights are about to come on. At some point during this hour, Brian pulled out his cell phone. He called his girlfriend, Alexis. He wanted to hear her voice. But Alexis, who was visiting family back in Toledo, was already asleep. She didn't pick up. Brian didn't leave a voicemail. That missed call would be the last time she ever saw his name light up her phone. As 2 a.m. approached closing time, the group got separated. Clint and Meredith were at the bar. Brian had wandered off into the crowd to talk to people. He was social. He was chatting up strangers. At 1:55 a.m., Brian walked out of the bar doors and into the lobby near the escalator. This is where the famous CCTV footage comes from. He strikes up a conversation with two young women, Amber and Brighton. He seems lucid. He's flirting, or maybe just being friendly. The conversation lasts barely a minute. He waves goodbye to them as they head down the escalator. And then, Brian makes a decision. Instead of following them down the escalator and going home, he turns around. He walks back toward the entrance of the Ugly Tuna. He steps out of the frame of the camera, moving back into the bar. The time stamp was 1:57 a.m. 3 minutes later, at 2 a.m. sharp, the bar lights came on. The music stopped. Security began herding everyone out. Clint and Meredith were waiting outside by the escalator. They watched the crowd pour out. Dozens of students, drunk and stumbling, heading for the exit. They waited for Brian. 5 minutes passed, then 10. They called his phone. It rang, but went to voicemail. Clint assumed Brian had already left, or perhaps he had gone home with a girl. It wasn't unlike him to pull a disappearing act to chase a romantic interest. So, Clint and Meredith shrugged it off. They got in their car and left. What they didn't know was that Brian hadn't gone home with a girl. He hadn't walked past them. In fact, according to the electronic eye watching that door, Brian Shaffer never left the bar at all. When Brian failed to show up for his flight to Miami with Alexis on Monday morning, the worry turned into panic. His family filed a missing persons report, and the Columbus Police Department descended on the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Their first move was to pull the surveillance tapes. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, but they had a massive advantage. The haystack was a single room with one public door. Investigators watched the footage from closing time. They watched it in real time. They watched it frame by frame. They even brought in a clicker to count every single person who walked out of that bar between 1:55 a.m. and the time the janitors locked up. They accounted for the staff. They accounted for the band. They accounted for every drunk student stumbling down that escalator. The math was terrifyingly simple. Brian walked in, but the number of people who walked out was one short. So, the police tore the building apart. They assumed, logically, that if he didn't use the front door, he must have used a back door. The bar had a service exit. It led into a back hallway used by the kitchen staff. But that hallway wasn't an easy escape route. It led to a freight elevator and a maze of corridors that eventually spit you out into a construction site. At the time, the area behind the bar was under heavy renovation. It was a mess of drywall, tools, and debris. It was unlit and dangerous. Police brought in cadaver dogs. They brought in tracking dogs. The dogs picked up Brian's scent at the bar entrance, but here is the chilling part. The scent didn't lead out the back door. It didn't lead to the construction site. It simply evaporated. If Brian had wandered into the construction zone, drunk and confused, he might have fallen or gotten trapped, but the search team scoured every inch of that site. They looked in dumpster bins. They looked in ventilation shafts. They looked in the poured concrete. They found absolutely nothing. No body, no cell phone, no wallet. It was as if the building itself had swallowed him whole. When the physical evidence leads to a dead end, investigators turn to the human element. And in the case of Brian Shaffer, all eyes turn to the last person to see him alive, his friend, Clint Florence. Now, it is important to state that Clint has never been charged with a crime. He has never been named an official suspect. But his behavior in the days and weeks following the disappearance raised immediate red flags for the detectives and for Brian's family. In the early stages of a missing persons case, friends usually bend over backwards to help. They hand over phone records, they sit for hours of questioning, they lead search parties. Meredith Reed, the third friend with them that night, did exactly that. She cooperated fully. Clint took a different path. According to investigators, Clint's story had gaps. He claimed he simply lost track of Brian in the crowd. He said he waited, called him, and then left. Just a standard night out. But when police asked Clint to take a polygraph test to rule him out, he refused. Instead of sitting down with detectives to clear his name, he hired a lawyer immediately. Once a lawyer enters the room, the conversation stops. Clint shut down. He stopped talking to the police. He stopped talking to Brian's family. This silence drove a wedge into the investigation. Brian's father, Randy, was desperate. He pleaded with Clint publicly. He just wanted to know if there was something else, maybe a detail Clint was hiding to protect Brian's reputation, or a drug deal gone wrong, or a secret fight. There were whispers of a verbal altercation between Brian and Clint earlier that night inside the bar. Witnesses claimed they saw the two arguing. Was Brian trying to ditch Clint? Was Clint angry that Brian was chatting up other people? We don't know, because the one man who holds those answers decided that he would never speak about that night again. And without a body, and without a confession, the police were helpless. They had a locked room, a missing man, and a silent witness. While the police hit brick walls, Brian's father, Randy Shaffer, refused to stop moving. For a father, the loss of a child is a nightmare. But for Randy, it was a compounding tragedy. He had lost his wife to cancer in March. 3 weeks later, he lost his son to the void. He was a man standing alone in a house that had once been full of life. Randy dedicated every waking hour to finding Brian. He spent his retirement savings hiring private investigators. He consulted psychics. He spent his weekends searching the banks of the Olentangy River, wading through mud and brush, looking for a shirt, a shoe, or a bone. He kept Brian's cell phone line active for years, just in case his son ever decided to turn it on. He refreshed the Find Brian Shaffer website daily, but the universe wasn't done with the Shaffer family yet. In September 2008, 2 years after Brian vanished, a heavy windstorm swept through Ohio. Randy was outside his home, cleaning up debris in the yard. A sudden gust of wind caught a heavy branch from a dead tree nearby. It snapped, fell, and struck Randy. He was killed instantly. Neighbors found him in the yard. In his pocket, he was still carrying a specialized badge that allowed him to access the search areas for his son. In the span of 2 years, the entire Shaffer family was gone. Renee to cancer. Brian to the mystery. Randy to a freak accident. Later, an online obituary for Randy appeared. It was filled with condolences from friends and strangers, but one comment stood out. It was signed by Dad, posted from the U.S. Virgin Islands. It said, "To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." For a brief, heart-stopping moment, the police thought this was it. Brian was alive. He had run away to the islands and was reaching out. They traced the IP address immediately. But the hope was crushed just as quickly as it appeared. The post was a cruel hoax, written by a public computer in Franklin County, Ohio. It was just an internet troll. toying with a dead man's memory. Today, nearly 2 decades have passed since the lights went out at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The bar eventually closed down. The space was gutted and remodeled, but no skeleton was found in the walls. No confession was ever signed. So, what happened to Brian Shaffer? We are left with 3 prevailing theories. Theory number 1, the walkaway. Proponents of this theory point to Brian's grief. His mother had just died. He was under immense pressure. Did he use the chaos of the bar to slip out unnoticed, perhaps wearing a hat or a different jacket, and vanish on purpose? Did he start a new life somewhere else? It's a romantic idea, but in the post-9/11 world, living without a digital footprint is nearly impossible. Brian hasn't used his social security number or bank account since 2006. Theory number 2, the smiley face killer. This is a controversial theory involving a network of serial killers who target college-aged men, drown them, and leave graffiti nearby. While popular on the internet, the FBI has largely debunked this, and crucially, Brian's body was never found in the river. Theory number 3, foul play inside the bar. This is the darkest and perhaps most logical theory. Some believe Brian never left the building alive. Did he get into a fight? Did he fall down a construction shaft? Did he die accidentally in the back of the house? If he died inside, his body would have had to be removed. Could he have been rolled out in a trash can or a cooler, or hidden in construction debris the next morning? It implies a conspiracy. It implies that someone knows exactly where he is. The cameras watch the door. The police watched the friends. The world watched the family disappear one by one. Brian Shaffer walked into a room, and he never walked out. And until someone breaks their silence, he remains the man who vanished in plain sight. If you found yourself captivated by this truly baffling mystery, please hit that like button to help more people discover Brian's story. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained.